Ah, a church. Ah, piano. Ah. Thank God, an audience. Good of you to come. You weren't put off by all those idiots who said Marx is dead. Well, I am, and I am not. That's dialectics for you. You may wonder how I got here. Public transportation. I did not expect to come back here. I wanted to return to Soho. That's where I lived in London. But a bureaucratic mix-up. Here I am, Soho in New York. Ah, well, I always wanted to visit New York. Why have I returned? To clear my name. I have been reading your newspapers. They are all declaring that my ideas are dead. It's nothing new. These clowns have been saying this for more than 100 years. Don't you wonder, why is it necessary to declare me dead again and again? Well, I have had it up to here. I asked for the right to come back, just for a while. But there are rules. I told you, it's a bureaucracy. It is permissible to read, even to watch, but not to travel. I protested, of course, and I had some support. Socrates told them the untraveled life is not worth living. Gandhi fasted. Mother Jones threatened to picket. Mark Twain came to my defense in his own strange way. Buddha chanted, Om. But the others kept quiet. My God, at this point, what do they have to lose? Yes, there too I have a reputation as a troublemaker. And even there, protest works. Finally they said, all right, you can go. For an hour or so you can speak your mind, but remember, no agitating. They do believe in freedom of speech, but within limits. They are liberals. You can spread the word. Marx is back for a short while. But understand one thing. I'm not a Marxist. I said that once to Pieper, and he almost croaked. I should tell you about Pieper. We were living in London, Jenny and I and the little ones, plus 2 dogs, 3 birds, and 2 cats, barely living, a flat on Dean Street near where they dump the city sewage. We were in London because I had been expelled from the continent, expelled from the Rhineland, yes, from my birthplace. I had done dangerous things. I was editor of a newspaper, Der Rheinische Zeitung, hardly revolutionary, but I suppose the most revolutionary act one can engage in is to tell the truth. In the Rhineland, the police were arresting poor people for gathering firewood from the estates of the rich. I wrote an editorial protesting that. Then they tried to censor our paper. I wrote an editorial declaring that there was no freedom of the press in Germany. They decided to prove me right. They shut us down. Only then did we become radical. Isn't that the way it is? Our last issue of the Zeitung had a huge headline in red ink: Revolt. That annoyed the authorities. They ordered me out of the Rhineland. So we went to Paris. Where else do exiles go? Where else can you sit all night in a cafe and tell lies about how revolutionary you were in the old country? Yes, if you are going to be an exile, be one in Paris. Paris was our honeymoon. Jenny found a tiny flat in the Latin Quarter. Heavenly months. But the word was out from the German police to the Paris police. It seems that the police develop an internationalist consciousness long before the workers. Yes, we were expelled from Paris too. So we went to Belgium, expelled again. We came to London, where refugees come from all over the world. The English are admirable in their tolerance and insufferable in their boasting about it. The doctors told me that cough would go away in a few weeks. That was in 1858. But I was telling you about Pieper. You see, in London, the political refugees from the continent marched in and out of our house. Pieper was one of them. He buzzed around me like a hornet. He was a flatterer, a sycophant. He would station himself 6 inches from me to make sure I could not evade him, and he would quote from my writings. I would say, Pieper, please don't quote me to myself. He had the audacity to say, thinking I would be pleased, that he would translate Das Kapital into English. Ha! The man could not speak a sentence of English without butchering it. English is a beautiful language. It is Shakespeare's language. If Shakespeare had heard Pieper speak one sentence of English, he would have taken poison. But Jenny felt sorry for him. She liked to invite him to our family dinners. One evening, Pieper came and announced the formation of a Marxist Society of London. A Marxist society, I asked. What's that? We meet every week to discuss another of your writings. We read aloud, examine sentence by sentence. That's why we call ourselves Marxists. We believe completely and wholeheartedly in everything you have written. Completely and wholeheartedly, I asked. Yes. And we would be honored. Herr Dr. Marx. He always called me Herr Dr. Marx. If you would address the next meeting of the Marxist Society. I cannot do that. Why, he asked. Because I'm not a Marxist. I did not mind his bad English. Mine was not that perfect. It was his way of thinking. He was an embarrassment. A satellite encircling my words, reflecting them to the world but distorting them. And then he defended the distortions like a fanatic, denouncing anyone who interpreted them differently. No, I wasn't going to have Pieper translate Das Kapital into English. It represented 15 years of work in the conditions of Soho. Walking every morning past beggars sleeping amidst the sewage, making my way to the British Museum and its magnificent library, working there until dusk, reading. Is there anything more dull than reading political economy? Yes, writing political economy. Then home through the darkening streets, listening to the vendors calling out the prices of their wares, and the veterans of the Crimean War, some blind, others without legs begging for a penny in the noxious air, the poor smell of London. Yes. My critics, hoping to minimize what went into Das Kapital, would say, as they always say about radical writers, oh, he must have had some dreadful personal experience. Yes, if you want to make much of it. That walk home through Soho fueled the anger that went into Das Kapital. I hear you saying, well, of course, that's how it was then, a century ago. Only then. On my way here today, I walked through the streets of your city, surrounded by garbage, breathing foul air, past the bodies of men and women sleeping in the streets, huddled against the cold. Instead of a lassie singing a ballad, I heard a voice in my ear. Some change, sir, for a cup of coffee. You call this progress because you have motor cars and telephones and flying machines and 1,000 potions to make you smell better, and people sleeping on the street. An official report. The United States' gross national product, yes, gross, last year was $7,000 billion. Most impressive, but tell me, where is it? Who is profiting from it? Who is not? Less than 500 individuals control $2,000 billion in business assets. Are these people more noble, more hardworking, more valuable to society than the mother in the tenement nurturing 3 children through the winter with no money to pay the heating bill? Did I not say 150 years ago that capitalism would enormously increase the wealth of society, but that this wealth would be concentrated into fewer and fewer hands? Giant merger of Chemical Bank and Chase Manhattan Bank. 12,000 workers will lose jobs. Stocks rise. And they say that my ideas are dead. Do you know Oliver Goldsmith's poem, A Deserted Village? Ill fares the land to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Yes, decay. That's what I saw on my walk through your streets of your city this morning. Houses decaying, schools decaying, human beings decaying. And then I walked a bit further and I was suddenly surrounded by men of obvious wealth, women in jewels and furs. Suddenly I heard the sound of sirens. Was violence being done somewhere nearby? Was a crime being committed? Was someone trying to take a part of the gross national product illegally from those who have stolen it legally? Oh, the wonders of the market system. Human beings reduced to commodities, their lives controlled by the super commodity, money. The committee does not like that. In that tiny flat in Soho, Jenny made hot soup and boiled potatoes. There was fresh bread from our friend the baker down the street. We would sit around the table and eat and talk about events of the day. The Irish struggle for freedom, the latest war, the stupidity of the country's leaders, a political opposition confining itself to pips and squeaks, the cowardly press. I suppose things are different these days, eh? After dinner, we would clear the table and I would work with my cigars handy and a glass of beer, yes, work until 3 or 4 in the morning. My books piled up on one side, the parliamentary reports piled up on the other. Jenny would be at another end of the table transcribing. My handwriting was impossible, and she would rewrite every word of mine. Can you imagine a more heroic act? Occasionally a crisis, no, not a world crisis, a book would be missing. One day I could not find my Ricardo. I asked Jenny, "Where is my Ricardo?" And she said, "You mean Principles of Political Economy?" Well, she thought I was finished with it and she had taken it to the pawn shop. I lost my temper. "My Ricardo! You pawned my Ricardo!" "Be quiet," she said. "Last week didn't we pawn the ring my mother gave me?" That's how it was. We pawned everything, especially gifts from Jenny's family. When we ran out of those gifts, we pawned our clothes. One winter, do you know the London winters? I did without my overcoat. Another time I walked out of the house and my feet began to freeze on the snow, and then I realized I was not wearing shoes. I had pawned them the day before. When Das Kapital was published, we celebrated. But Engels had to give us some money so we could go to the pawn shop and retrieve our dishes and linens for the dinner. Engels, a saint. There is no other word for him. When they cut off our water, our gas, our house was dark and our spirits low. Engels paid the bills. His father owned factories in Manchester. Yes, capitalism saved us. He did not always understand our needs. We had no money for groceries, and he sent us crates of wine. One Christmas, when we had no means to buy a Weihnachtsbaum, a Christmas tree, Engels arrived with 6 bottles of champagne. So we imagined the tree, formed a circle around it, drank champagne, and sang Christmas songs. Oh, Tannenbaum, oh, Tannenbaum, da 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 da. I know what my revolutionary friends were thinking. Marx, the atheist, with a Christmas tree. Yes, I did describe religion as the opium of the people, but no one has ever paid attention to the full passage. Listen. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. True, opium is not the solution, but it may be necessary to relieve pain. Oh, don't I know that from my boils? And doesn't the world have a terrible case of boils? I keep thinking about Jenny, how she packed up all our possessions and brought our 2 children, Jenishin and Laura, across the channel to London, then gave birth 3 times in that cold, miserable flat in Soho, nursed those babies and tried to keep them warm and watched them die one by one. Guido had not even begun to walk, and Francesca was a year old. I had to borrow £3 to pay for her coffin. As for Moose, he lived for 8 years, but there was something wrong from the start. He had a large, handsome head, but the rest of him never grew. The night he died, we all slept on the floor around his body until the morning came. When Eleanor was born, we were fearful, but she was a tough little thing. It's good that she had 2 older sisters. They had barely survived themselves. Jenishin was born in Paris. Paris is marvelous for lovers, but not for children. There's something about the air. Laura was our second, born in Brussels. Nobody should be born in Brussels. In London, we had no money, but we always had Sunday picnics. We would walk an hour and a half into the countryside, Jenny and I, the children, and Lenchen. Oh, I'll tell you about her. Lenchen would make a roast veal, and we would have tea, fruit, bread, cheese, beer. Eleanor was the youngest, but she drank beer. No money, but children need a vacation. Once I took the rent money and sent them to the Atlantic coast of France. Another time, with the groceries money, I bought a piano because the children loved music. A father is not supposed to have favorites among his children. But Eleanor, I would say to Jenny, Eleanor is a strange child. And she would reply, "You expect the children of Karl Marx to be normal?" Eleanor was the brightest, the youngest. Imagine a revolutionary at the age of 8. That's how old she was in 1863. Poland was in rebellion against Russian rule. Tussie wrote a letter. That's what we called her, Tussie. She wrote to Engels about those brave little fellows in Poland, as she called them. When she was 9, she sent a letter to America. Advice to President Lincoln, telling him how to win the war against the Confederacy. Also, she smoked and drank wine. Still, she was a girl. She would dress her dolls while sipping from a glass of wine. She played chess with me when she was 10, and I could not easily defeat her. When she was 15, she suddenly became furious about the law about observing the Lord's Day. No activity on Sunday was permitted. So she organized Sunday evenings for the people at St. Martin's Hall, brought musicians there to play Handel, Mozart, Beethoven. The hall was packed, 2,000 people. It was illegal, but no one was arrested. A lesson. If you are going to break the law, do it with 2,000 people. And Mozart. I used to read Shakespeare and Aeschylus and Dante aloud to her and her children, which she loved. Her room was a Shakespeare museum. She memorized Romeo and Juliet and insisted I read over and over again those lines from Romeo where he sees Juliet for the first time. The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy regions stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. Tussie was not easy to live with. Oh no. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a child who finds flaws in your reasoning? She would argue with me about my writings. For instance, my essay on the Jewish question. Not easy to understand, I admit. Well, Eleanor read it and immediately challenged me. Why do you single out the Jews as representatives of capitalism? They are not the only ones poisoned with commerce and greed. I tried to explain I wasn't singling out the Jews, only using them as a vivid example. Her answer was to start wearing a Jewish star. I am a Jew, she announced. What could I say? I shrugged my shoulders, and she said, that's a very Jewish gesture. She could be very annoying. Tussie knew my father had converted to Christianity. It was not practical to be a Jew in Germany. Is it ever practical to be a Jew anywhere? He had me baptized at the age of 8. This fact intrigued Eleanor. She asked, Moore. The family called me Moore because of my dark complexion. I know that you were baptized, but first you were circumcised, weren't you? Nothing embarrassed that girl. At such times she was impossible. Alongside her Jewish star, she wore her crucifix. No, she was not enamored of Christianity, but of the Irish and their rebellion against England. She learned about the English struggle from Lizzie Burns, Engels' love. Lizzie was a mill girl and could not read. Engels spoke 9 languages. You might think this would make it hard for them to communicate, but they loved one another. Lizzie was active in the Irish movement. Tussie would visit, and the two of them would sit on the floor, drink wine together, and sing Irish songs until they fell asleep. There was that terrible night, the night the English government hanged 2 young Irishmen right there in Soho, with a drunken crowd cheering. These genteel English with their afternoon teas and public hangings. I understand you don't hang people anymore, only gas them or inject poison into their veins or use electricity to burn them to death. Much more civilized. Yes, they hanged 2 young Irishmen for wanting freedom from England. Eleanor wept and wept. I would say to her, Tussie, you don't have to get involved so soon in the horrors of the world. You're 15. And she would reply, that's the point, Moore. I'm not 13. I'm not 14. I'm 15. Yes, she was 15. And she became infatuated with any dashing, handsome man who visited our flat. I could draw up a list for all the rest of her life. Eleanor was clever in politics, idiotic in love. She was mad about the hero of the French Commune, La Ségara. Well, at least he was a Frenchman. Jenison's fellow was English. English men are like English food. Need I say more? And there was Laura's lover, Lafargue. His public displays of ardor were absurd. He would put his hand on her ass in public as if it were the most natural thing. And Jenny defended him. It's his Creole background, she said. You know, his family came to France from Cuba. As if everyone in Cuba went around with their hand on somebody's ass. Jenny was always trying to calm me down. Well, she might call me, but she was unsuccessful with my boils. Damn cough. Did you ever have boils? There is no sickness more odious. They plagued me all my life and led to stupid attempts to analyze me via my boils. Marx is angry at the capitalist system because he has boils. What imbeciles. How do you account for all the revolutionaries who don't have boils? They always have something. This one was beaten by his father. That one was nursed by his mother until he was 10. This one had no toilet training. As if one must be abnormal to resent exploitation. Any explanation except the obvious one, that capitalism by its nature, its attack on the human spirit breeds rebellion. Oh, well, they say, capitalism has become more humane since your time. Really? Just a few years ago, I read about it in the newspapers. Factory owners locked the doors on women in their chicken factory in North Carolina. There was a fire. 25 workers were trapped, burned to death. I suppose my anger did inflame my boils, but try working, try sitting and writing with boils on your ass. And don't tell me about doctors. The doctors knew less than I did, much less because the boils were mine. I could not sleep. And then I discovered something miraculous. Water. Yes, as simple as that. Cloth soaked in warm water. Jenny would apply them patiently, hour after hour. She would wake up in the middle of the night when I cried out and apply those soothing cloths. Sometimes when Jenny was away, Lenchen would do that. Yes, Lenchen. Here we are living in poverty, and Jenny's mother decides to send us Lenchen to help with the babies. We'd pawned our furniture, and suddenly we had a servant girl. Isn't that the way when you marry into aristocracy? Your in-laws don't send you money, which you desperately need. Instead, they send you fine linens and silverware and a servant girl. Actually, not a bad idea. The servant can take the silverware and linens to the pawn shop and get some money. Lenchen did that many times. But she was never a servant. The girls adored her, and Jenny had tremendous affection for her. When Jenny was ill, Lenchen was with her, attending to every need. But yes, her presence created a great tension between Jenny and me. I remember a scene. Jenny said, "This morning I saw you looking at Lenchen." Looking? What do you mean? I mean the way a man looks at a woman. I still don't know what you mean. It was one of those conversations that cannot possibly come to any good. All this was happening inside our flat on Dean Street, and outside was London. Could you imagine the streets of London in 1858? The coster girls trying to sell a few rolls for a few pennies, the organ grinder with his monkey, the prostitutes, the magicians, the fire eaters, the street vendors bellowing trumpets, ringing bells, the hurdy-gurdies, the organs, the brass bands, the Scottish pipers, the fiddlers, and always a beggar girl singing an Irish ballad. That's what I saw and heard walking home every evening from the British Museum under the gas lamps that had just been lit, until I came to Dean Street, where I made my way through mud and sewage, thinking about the care they took in paving the streets in the wealthy neighborhoods. Well, I I suppose it was only fitting that the author of Das Kapital should slog through shit while writing his condemnation of the capitalist system. Jenny did not sympathize with my complaints about wading through mud on the streets. She would say, "That's how it feels to me reading Das Kapital." She was always my severest critic, unsparing, honest, you might say. Is there anything more outrageous than an honest critic? The book troubled her. Yes, Das Kapital. She worried that I would bore people from the start with my discussion of commodities, use value, exchange value. She said the book was too long, too detailed. She used the word ponderous. Imagine. She reminded me what our trade union friend Peter Fox said when I gave him the book. I feel like a man who has been given an elephant as a gift. Jenny said, "It is an elephant." I tried to tell her, this is not the Communist Manifesto, which was intended for a general public. It is an analysis. Let it be an analysis, she said, but let it cry out like the manifesto. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. Yes, she said, that excites the reader. A specter is haunting Europe. And then she read to me the first words of Das Kapital. To torment me, of course. The wealth of those societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities. That will put readers to sleep, she said. I ask you, is that boring? Well, maybe it is a little boring. I admitted that to Jenny, and she said, there's no such thing as a little boring. Don't misunderstand. She did see Das Kapital as a profound analysis. It showed how the capitalist system must, at a certain stage of history, come into being and bring about a colossal growth of the productive forces, an unprecedented increase in the wealth of the world, and how it must, by its nature, distribute that wealth in such a way as to destroy the humanity of both laborer and capitalist, and how it must, by its nature, create its own gravediggers and give way to a more humane system. But Jenny always asked, are we reaching the people we want to reach? One day she said to me, do you know why the censors have allowed it to be published? Because they cannot understand it and assume no one else will. I reminded her that Das Kapital was having favorable reviews. She reminded me that most of the reviews were written by Engels. I told her that perhaps she was critical of my work because she was unhappy with me. You men, she said, you cannot believe that your work deserves criticism, and so you attribute it to something personal. Yes, Moore, my personal feelings are there, but this is separate. Yes, her personal feelings. Jenny was going through a difficult time then. I suppose I was responsible, but I did not know how to ease her anguish. You must understand, Jenny and I fell in love when I was 17 and she was 19. She was marvelous looking with dark eyes and auburn hair. For some reason, her family took a liking to me. They were aristocrats. Aristocrats are always impressed with intellectuals. Jenny's father and I would have long conversations about Greek philosophy. I had done my doctoral thesis on Democritus and Heraclitus. I was beginning to realize that up until now, the philosophers had only interpreted the world. But the point was to change it. When I was expelled from Germany, Jenny followed me to Paris, and there she gave birth to Jenishin and Laura. We were happy in Paris, living on nothing, meeting our friends in a cafe. They also lived on nothing. What a bunch we were. Bakunin, the huge, shaggy anarchist. Engels, the handsome atheist. Heine, the saintly poet. Oh, Stirner, the total misfit. And Proudhon, who said, property is theft, but wanted some. Being poor in Paris is one thing. Being poor in London is quite another. We moved there with 2 children, and soon Jenny was pregnant again. I sometimes felt she blamed me for having to bring up our children in a cold, damp flat where someone was sick all the time. Jenny came down with smallpox. She recovered, but it left pockmarks on her face. I tried to tell her that she was still beautiful, but it didn't help. Oh, I wish you could know, Jenny. What she did for me cannot be calculated. And she accepted the fact that I could not simply get a job like other men. Oh, yes, I did try once. I wrote a letter of inquiry to the railway for a position as clerk. They responded as follows. Dr. Marx, we are honored by your request for a position here. We have never had a doctor of philosophy working for us as a clerk. But the position requires a legible handwriting, and so we must regretfully decline your offer. Jenny believed in my ideas, but she was impatient with what she considered the pretensions of high-level scholarship. Come down to earth, Herr Doctor, she would say. She wanted me to describe the theory of surplus value so that ordinary workers would understand it. I told her that no one can understand it unless they first understand the labor theory of value and how labor power is a special commodity whose value is determined by the cost of the means of existence, of subsistence, and yet gives value to all other commodities, a value which always exceeds the value of labor power. Jenny shook her head. Oh no, that will not do. All you have to say is this: your employer gives you only the barest amount in wages, just enough to survive and work. But out of your labor, he makes far more than what he pays you, so he gets richer and richer while you stay poor. All right. Let us say only 100 people in world history have ever understood my theory of surplus value. But it is still true. Just last week, I was reading the reports of the United States Department of Labor. There you have it. Your workers are producing more and more goods and getting less and less in wages. What is the result? Just as I predicted. Now the richest 1% of the American population owns 40% of the wealth. And that is the great model of world capitalism. A nation that not only robbed its own people, but sucked in the wealth of the rest of the world. Jenny was always trying to simplify ideas that were by their nature complex. She accused me of being a scholar first and a revolutionary second. Forget your intellectual readers, she would say. Address the workers. She called me arrogant and intolerant. Why do you attack other revolutionaries more vehemently than you attack the bourgeoisie, she asked. Proudhon, for example. The man could not understand why we must applaud capitalism for its development of giant industries and then take them over. Proudhon thought that we must retreat into a more simple society. when he wrote his book, The Philosophy of Poverty, I replied with my own book, The Poverty of Philosophy. I thought that was clever. Jenny thought it insulting. I suppose Jenny was a far better human being than I could ever be. She encouraged me to get off my behind and get involved in the cause of the London workers. She came with me when I was invited to address the first meeting of the International Working Men's Association. It was the fall of 1864. 2,000 people were packed into St. Martin's Hall. The workers of all countries must unite against foreign policies which are criminal, which play on national prejudice, and which squander in wars the people's blood and treasure. We must combine across national boundaries to vindicate the simple laws of morals and justice in international affairs. Workers of the world, unite! Jenny liked that. She kept the family going when the gas was cut off, the water was cut off. But she never tired of the subject of female emancipation. She said that the vitality of woman was being sapped by her staying at home and darning socks and cooking, and so she refused to stay at home. She accused me of being theoretically an emancipationist, but practically ignorant of the problems of women. You and Engels, she said, write about sexual equality, but you do not practice it. Well, I won't comment on that. She supported with all her heart the Irish rebellion against England. Queen Victoria had said, "These Irish are really abominable people, unlike any other civilized nation." Jenny wrote a letter to the London newspapers. "England hangs Irish rebels who wanted nothing but freedom. Is England a civilized nation?" Jenny and I were powerfully in love. How can I make you understand that? But we went through hellish times in London. The love was still there, but at a certain point things changed. I don't know why. Jenny said it was because she was no longer the great beauty I had wooed. That made me angry. She said it was because of Lenchen. That made me even more angry. She said I was angry because it was true. That made me furious. They claim, because the Soviet Union has collapsed, that communism is dead. Do these idiots know what communism is? Do they think that a system run by a thug who murders his fellow revolutionaries is communism? Scheißkopfen! Journalists, politicians who say such things, what kind of education did they have? Did they ever read the Communist Manifesto that Engels and I wrote when he was 28 years old and I was 30? In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Did you hear that? An association. Do they understand the objective of communism? Freedom of the individual to develop himself, herself as a compassionate human being. Do they think that someone who calls himself a communist or socialist and acts like a gangster knows what communism is? to shoot those who disagree with you. Can that be the communism I gave my life for? That monster who took all power for himself in Russia and then insisted on interpreting my ideas like a religious fanatic when he was putting his old comrades up against the war before firing squads. Did he allow his citizens to read the letter I had sent to the New York Tribune, in which I said that capital punishment cannot be justified in any society calling itself civilized? Socialism is not supposed to reproduce the stupidities of capitalism. Here, in America, your prisons are crowded. Who is in them? The poor. Some of them have committed violent, terrible crimes. Most of them are thieves, robbers, burglars, sellers of drugs. They believe in free enterprise. They do what the capitalists do, but on a much smaller scale. Do you know what Engels and I wrote about prisons? Rather than punish individuals for their crimes, we should destroy the social conditions which engender crime and give to each individual the scope which he needs in society in order to develop his life. Yes, I spoke about the dictatorship of the proletariat, not a dictatorship of a party, of a central committee, not a dictatorship of one man. No, I spoke about the temporary dictatorship of the working class. The mass of individuals would take over the state and govern in the interest of all until the state itself would become unnecessary and gradually disappear. Bakunin, of course, disagreed. He said that a state, even a worker state, if it has an army, police, prisons, will become a tyranny. He loved to argue with me. Do you know about him? Bakunin, the anarchist. If a novelist were to invent such a character, one would say that the existence of such a person cannot be possible. To say that Bakunin and I disagreed is a great understatement. Listen to what he said at the time Engels and I were in Brussels writing the manifesto. Marx and Engels, especially Marx, are ingrained bourgeois. We were ingrained bourgeois. Well, of course, compared to Bakunin, everyone was bourgeois, because Bakunin chose to live like a pig. And if you did not live like a pig, if you had a roof over your head, if you had a piano in your sitting room, if you enjoyed some fresh bread and wine, you were a bourgeois. I grant the man courage. He was imprisoned, sent to Siberia, escaped, wandered the world trying to foment revolution everywhere. He wanted an anarchist society, but the only anarchism he ever succeeded in establishing was in his head. He tried to start an uprising in Bologna and almost killed himself with his own revolver. His revolutions failed everywhere, but he was like a man whose failure with women only spurs him on to more. Have you ever seen a photograph of Bakunin? Giant of a man, bald head which he covered with a little gray cap, massive beard, ferocious expression. He had no teeth, scurvy, the result of his prison diet. He lived not in this world, but in some world of his imagination. He was oblivious to money. When he had it, he gave it away. When he didn't have it, he borrowed with no thought of returning it. He had no home. Or you might say the world was his home. He would arrive at a comrade's house and announce, "I'm here. Where do I sleep? And what do I eat?" In an hour, he was more at home than his hosts. I remember that time in Soho. We were having dinner and Bakunin burst in, didn't bother to knock. It was his habit to arrive at dinner time. We were surprised. We thought he was in Italy. Whenever we heard about him, he was in some far-off country organizing a revolution. Well, he almost knocked the doors off its hinges, came in, looked around, smiled his toothless smile, and said, "Good evening, comrades." And then, without waiting for reply, he sat down at the table and began devouring sausage and meat in enormous chunks, stuffing in cheese, too, and glass after glass of brandy. I said to him, "Mikhail, try the wine. We've plenty of that. Brandy is expensive." He drank some wine, spit it right out. "Absolutely tasteless," he said. "Brandy helps you think more clearly." And then he began his usual performance, preaching, arguing, ordering, shouting, exhorting. I was furious, but it was Jenny who spoke up. "Mikhail, stop. You're consuming all the oxygen in the room." He just roared with laughter and went on. Bakunin's head was filled with anarchist garbage, romantic utopian nonsense. I wanted to expel him from the International. Jenny thought this ridiculous. "Why," she asked, "do revolutionary groups with 6 members always threaten someone with expulsion?" He had 100 disguises because the police were looking for him in every country in Europe. When he came to us in London, he was disguised as a priest. At least he thought so. He looked ridiculous. Well, he stayed with us a week. Once we stayed up all night, drinking and arguing and drinking some more, until neither of us could walk. In fact, I fell asleep in the midst of one of Bakunin's perorations. He shook me until I awoke, saying, "I haven't finished my point." There was that glorious time in the winter of 1871 when the Commune had taken power in Paris. Yes, the Paris Commune. Bakunin leaped with his full bulk into that revolution. The French understood him. They had a saying, "On the first day of a revolution, Bakunin is a treasure. On the second day, he should be shot." Do you know about that magnificent episode in human history, the Paris Commune? The story starts with stupidity. I am speaking of Napoleon III, yes, the nephew of Bonaparte. He was a buffoon, a stage actor smiling to the crowd while 16 million French peasants lived in blind, dark hovels, their children dying of starvation. But because he kept a legislature, because people voted, it was thought they had a democracy, a common mistake. Bonaparte wanted glory, so he made the mistake of attacking Bismarck's armies. He was quickly defeated, whereupon the victorious Germans marched into Paris and were greeted by something more devastating than guns: silence. They found the statues of Paris draped in black, an immense, invisible, silent resistance. They did the wise thing. They paraded through the Arc de Triomphe and quickly departed. And the old French order, the Republic, liberals they called themselves, they dared not come into Paris. They were trembling with fear because now, with the Germans gone, Paris was taken over by the workers, the housewives, the clerks, the intellectuals, the armed citizens. The people of Paris formed not a government, but something more glorious, something which governments everywhere fear, a commune, the collective energy of the people. Yes, it was the Commune de Paris. People meeting 24 hours a day, all over the city in knots of 3 or 4, making decisions together. while the city was encircled by the French army, threatening to invade at any moment. Paris became the first free city of the world, the first enclave of liberty in a world of tyranny. I said to Bakunin, "You want to know what I mean by the dictatorship of the proletariat? Look at the Paris Commune. That is true democracy, not the democracy of England or America, where elections are circuses with people voting for one or another of the old guard. And whatever candidate wins, the rich still go on ruling the country." The Paris Commune, it lasted only a few months, but it was the first legislative body to represent the poor. Its laws were for them. It abolished their debts, postponed their rents, forced the pawnbrokers to give back their most needed possessions. They refused to take salaries higher than the workers. They lowered the hours of bakers and planned how to give free admission to the theater for everyone. The great Courbet himself, whose paintings had stunned Europe, presided over the Federation of Artists. They reopened the museums, set up a commission for the education of women, something unheard of, education for women. They took advantage of the latest in science, the lighter-than-air balloon, and launched one out of Paris to soar over the countryside, dropping printed paper for the peasants with a simple, powerful message, a message that should be dropped to working people everywhere in the world. Our interests are the same. The Commune declared the purpose of the schools to teach children how to love and respect their fellow creatures. I have read your endless discussions of education. Such nonsense. They teach everything needed to succeed in the capitalist world, but do they teach the young to struggle for justice? The communards paid attention to that. They educated not only by their words, but by their acts. They destroyed the guillotine, that instrument of tyranny, and even revolutionary tyranny, and then, wearing red scarves, carrying a huge red banner, the buildings festooned with sheets of red silk, they gathered around the Vendome column, symbol of military power, a huge statue surmounted by the bronze head of Napoleon Bonaparte. A pulley was attached to the head, a capstan turned, and the head crashed to the ground. People climbed on the ruins. A red flag now floated from the pedestal. Now it was a pedestal not of one country, but of the human race, and watching men and women wept for joy. The Paris Commune. The streets were always full, conversations going on everywhere. People shared things. They seemed to smile more often. Kindness ruled. The streets were safe without police of any kind. Yes, that was socialism. But that example, the example of the Paris Commune, could not be allowed. So the armies of the Republic marched into Paris and commenced a slaughter. The leaders of the Commune were taken to the Père Lachaise cemetery, put against the stone wall, and shot. In all, 30,000 people were killed. The Commune was crushed by wolves and swine. But it was the most glorious achievement of our time. Bakunin and I drank and argued, and drank and argued some more. I said to him, "Mikhail, you don't understand the concept of a proletarian state. We cannot just shake off the past in one orgasmic moment. The people making the new order will have to do so with the remnants of the old order. That takes time." "No," he said, The people overthrowing the old order must immediately live in freedom or they will lose it. It began to get personal. I was becoming impatient and I said, "You are too stupid to understand." "Marx," he said, "you are an arrogant son of a bitch, as always. It is you who do not understand. You think the workers will make a revolution based on your theory? They care not a shit for your theory. Their anger will rise spontaneously, and they will make a revolution without your so-called science. The instinct for revolution is in their bellies." He was aroused. "I spit on your theories." As he said that, he spit on the floor. What a pig. This was too much. I said, "Mikhail, you can spit on my theories, but not on my floor. Clean up immediately." "There," he said, "I always knew you were a bully." I said, "I always knew you were a eunuch." He roared. It sounded like some prehistoric animal. Then he leaped on top of me. You must understand, the man was enormous. We wrestled on the floor, but we were both too drunk to really hurt one another. After a while, we were so tired, we just lay on the floor catching our breath. Then he rose, like a hippopotamus rising from a river, unbuttoned his trousers, and began to urinate out the window. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Mikhail, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" "What in the hell do you think I'm doing? I'm pissing out your window." "That's disgusting, Mikhail," I said. "I'm pissing on London. I'm pissing on the whole British Empire." "No," I said, "you're pissing on my street." He didn't reply, just buttoned his trousers, lay down on the floor, and began to snore. I lay down on the floor myself and was soon unconscious. Jenny found us hours like that when we awoke with the dawn. No, they could not allow the commune to live. The commune was dangerous to inspiring an example for the rest of the world, so they drowned it in blood. It still happens, does it not, that whenever in some corner of the world the old order is destroyed and people begin to experiment with a new way of living, people innocent of ideology, just angry at their lives, it cannot be permitted. And so they go to work. You know who I mean by they. Sometimes insidiously, covertly, sometimes directly, violently, to destroy it. They keep saying that capitalism has triumphed. Triumphed, why? Because the stock market has risen to the sky and stockholders are even wealthier than before. Triumphed when 1/4 of American children live in poverty and 40,000 of them die before their first birthday. 100,000 people lined up before dawn in New York City for 2,000 jobs. What will happen to the 98,000 who are turned away? Is that why you are building more prisons? Yes. Capitalism has triumphed, but over whom? You have technological marvels. You have sent men into the stratosphere, but what about those people left on Earth? Why are they so fearful? Why do they turn to drugs and alcohol? Why do they go berserk and kill? Yes, it's in the newspapers. Your politicians are bloated with pride. The world will now move toward the free enterprise system, they say. Has everyone become stupid? Don't they know the history of the free enterprise system? When government did nothing for the people and everything for the rich. Your government gave 100 million acres of land free to the railroad and then turned away as Chinese immigrants and Irish immigrants worked 12 hours a day on those railroads and died in the heat and the cold. And when the workers rebelled and went on strike, the government sent in armies to smash them into submission. Why the hell did I write Das Kapital if not because I saw the misery of capitalism, of the free enterprise system? In England, little children were put to work in the textile mills because their tiny fingers could work the spindles. In America, young girls went to work in the mills of Massachusetts at the age of 10 and died at the age of 25. Your cities were cesspools of vice and poverty. That is capitalism, then and now. Yes, I have seen the luxuries advertised in your magazines and on your screens. Yes, all those screens with all those pictures. You see so much and know so little. Doesn't anybody read history anymore? What kind of shit are they teaching in the schools these days? They are so sensitive. I miss Jenny. She would have something to say about all this. I watched her die, sick and miserable at the end, but surely she remembered our years of pleasure, our moments of ecstasy in Paris, even in Soho. I miss my daughters. Anniversary of Gulf War, a victory short and sweet. Yes, I know all about those short, sweet wars that leave thousands of corpses in the field and children dying from lack of food and medicine in Europe, Africa, Palestine, people killing one another over boundaries. Don't you remember what I said 150 years ago? Wipe out those ridiculous national boundaries. No more passports, no more visas, no more border guards or immigration quotas, no more flags or pledges of allegiance to some artificial entity called a nation. Workers of the world, unite! Oh. Oh God, my back is killing me. I confess I did not reckon with capitalism's ingeniousness in surviving. I could not imagine that there would be drugs to keep the sick system alive, wars to keep industries going, to make people crazed with patriotism so they would forget their misery, religious fanatics promising the world that Jesus will return. I know Jesus. He's not coming back. I was wrong in 1848 thinking capitalism was on the way out. My timing was a bit off, perhaps by 200 years. But it will be transformed. All the present systems will be transformed. People are not fools. I remember your President Lincoln saying that you can't fool all the people all the time. Their common sense, their instinct for decency and justice will bring them together. Don't scoff. It has happened before, and it can happen again, and this time on a larger scale. And when it does happen, the rulers of society, with all their wealth, with all their armies will be helpless to prevent it. Their servants will refuse to serve. Their soldiers will disobey orders. Yes, capitalism has accomplished wonders, unsurpassed in history, miracles of technology and science, but it is preparing its own death. Its voracious appetite for profit, more, creates a world in turmoil. It turns everything, art, literature, music, beauty itself, into commodities to be bought and sold. It turns human beings into commodities, and not just the factory worker, but the physician, the scientist, lawyers, poets, artists, all must sell themselves to survive. And when they realize they are all workers, they will band together in order to fulfill themselves, and not just in their own country, because capitalism needs a world market. Their cry is free trade because they need to roam freely everywhere in the world to make more profit, more. But in doing so, they create unintentionally a world culture. People cross borders as never before in history. Ideas cross borders. Something new is bound to come of this. When Jenny and I were in Paris, I was 25, and I wrote that in the new industrial system, people are estranged from their work because it is distasteful to them. They are estranged from nature as machines, smoke, smells, noise invade their senses. Progress, it is called. They are estranged from others because everyone is set against everyone else, scrambling for survival. And they are estranged from their own selves, living lives that are not their own, living as they do not really want to live, so that the good life is possible only in dreams, in fantasy. But it does not have to be. There is still the possibility of choice. Only a possibility, I grant. Nothing is certain. That is now clear. I was too damned certain. Now I know. Anything can happen. But people must get off their asses! Does that sound too radical for you? Remember, to be radical is merely to grasp the root of a problem, and the root is us. I have a suggestion. Pretend you have boils. Pretend that sitting on your ass gives you enormous pain, so you must get up, must move, must act. Let's not speak anymore about capitalism, socialism. Let's just speak about using the incredible wealth of the earth for human beings. Give people what they need: food, medicine, fresh air, pure water, trees, grass, pleasant homes to live in, some hours of work, more hours of leisure. Don't ask who deserves it. Every human being deserves it. Well, it's time to go. Do you resent my coming back and irritating you? Look at it this way. It is the second coming. Christ couldn't make it. So Marx came.